So let's first talk about one of the case studies, which I think most of you guys know about already. This is called Project Oxygen. So again, quick straw poll. How many of you have worked for a manager that you would follow to another job? All right, and how many of you have worked for a manager that you could not wait to leave and actually forced you out of a job because it was so horrible to work for that? Okay? So we found in 5 seconds what it took us 18 months to do at Google, but that managers actually do matter. So again, context at Google, we're a technology company. So for those of you in the space, you know that with engineers, they don't really appreciate people management much. They think technical skills are actually more important, and even the people managers themselves don't appreciate the fact that they're bringing something to the table. So as a technology company, there actually was a legitimate question of, should we even have people managers on the technology side, or should we just have everyone kind of do their own thing, and we'll have project managers, but not people managers? So this is the culture we were combating, and we could have pointed to a bunch of stuff. We could have had a poll like this and said, look, they actually matter, but that wouldn't fly at Google. We also could have gone outside and said, look, benchmarks show that managers matter. Also wouldn't work. The challenge of working at Google is we actually have to prove things with our internal data. So that's why we embarked on this journey to figure out Project Oxygen to answer the question of why managers matter, or do managers matter. And the team that did that is another sub-team within our analytics team called the Pi Lab, so the People and Innovation Lab. And think of it pi like the Greek symbol, just to be, it's scientific, right? As an aside, they celebrate Pi Day, which is March 14th. Every year we have Pi on Pi Day. They also have a cool mission statement. So they don't have a cool sticker like the one I showed you before, but this is their mission statement. And it's to conduct innovative research that transforms organizational practice within Google and beyond. Right? Very, very aspirational. We don't want to stop just within Google. We don't want to stop just in people ops. We want to actually influence academia. We want to influence people beyond just our local company. In fact, every year we have something called the Pi Lab Summit, where we invite academics from around the country, usually about a dozen of them, just to talk about problems and issues, hear what they're talking about, and ultimately, hopefully, partner with them on certain events and experiments. So this is the team that ran through this. The Pi Lab is composed of a bunch of academics with a variety of backgrounds, sociologists, IO psychologists, behavioral economists. And what they try to do is assess problems like this. So with managers, we tried to understand first, is there actually differentiation between managers? Are there good ones and bad ones? As our straw poll showed, yes, there is, but we had to prove it with data. So the first thing we did was we looked at Google Guys, which is our annual survey. And like all annual employee surveys, there's a section that talks about your manager and says, you know, is your manager good at X? Yes, or satisfied or not satisfied? And what we found is, yes, there are pockets of managers that score well and pockets of managers that don't. But we didn't want to stop there because that's just bottoms up, right? So you could argue that some managers are very effective at managing their folks. Some are just nice, so they get good scores, but they might be ineffective. So how do you actually measure their impact? We looked at our performance reviews. So we call it PERF, but basically they're annual scores. Which ones had higher scores and which ones had lower scores? And the key there was to understand who was having business impact from and was performing well from their peer and above opinion rather than just the bottoms up opinion. So this gave us two very nice meaty sets of data with which to understand, are there people that are really good managers? And we put them in a classic 2x2, so imagine a 2x2 like this. And we wanted to find those that were high, so high in Google Guys and high in Perf. And if there were those that were low, so low in Google Guys, low in Perf. And we found that there actually were pockets in both. There was a huge clump in the middle, right, so a little noisy in the middle, but there were distinct pockets on both ends. So this is fantastic, right? So we're able to find that A, there's differentiation amongst the managers. The second thing we were able to find, though, more importantly, was that they actually matter. So what we did was we conducted a bunch of analyses to understand what happens to people if you work for a high manager, good in both scores, and what happens to you if you work for a low-performing manager, and what happens if you move between teams. Is there a detrimental effect? And we found everything that you would expect. So attrition rates higher for those that are on the low side. Engagement lower for those that are on the low side. If you switch teams, you're much more likely to attrit from Google if you go from a high manager to a low manager. So everything that you would expect actually panned out. The managers really did make a difference. So that's fantastic. And if we wanted to stop there, we could have and said, hey, we proved it, we're done. But we wanted to go further and really try to derive some insight. And our next question that we asked ourselves is, well, what actually makes these managers effective? What best practices do they have? So we basically conducted the equivalent of a pharmaceutical study, where we conducted a bunch of double-blind interviews. So as an example, I was one of the interviewers. I had no idea if the person I was interviewing was a good high or low, until once you start talking, you figure it out pretty quickly, but I didn't know going in. how good they were, right? And we had the same sets of questions. So I read the same exact questions as somebody that was interviewing somebody that was a high. And we found a bunch of really interesting characteristics. But we didn't want to stop there either. We also have something called the Great Manager Award, which is what it sounds like. So it's an annual award where people can nominate their manager, and you have to do a write-up. So it's a little more of an essay form. And so we called through those to find, all right, well, what are people talking about? What do they appreciate about their manager such that they're going to give somebody the Great Manager Award? And these, you get like this big trip, like it's a pretty big deal. This isn't just like a blue ribbon type thing. And we found a lot of things there as well that helped to validate what we learned in the interviews. So big benefit of all this, after conducting all this qualitative analysis, then the academics went back and started looking at this to try to understand what the consistent drivers were. And they found these 8 characteristics, which again, this has been in the Times and a few other places. The key thing here, I won't go through them all specifically, but a lot of them have to do with how much the manager is personally engaged with their employee. So you look at things like a good coach, expresses interest and concern. These are not things you classically find with a technology person, right? So classically, they're not showing that much empathy. And these were hugely helpful to understand where can we coach our management layer, particularly on the tech side, to understand how to be a really good manager. Technology is still there, so it's important to have the technical skills. So I couldn't go manage an engineering team, for example, because of lack of technical skills. But it's not the one thing that they're looking for. It's part of the package that they're looking for. So we found this to be very important. And we also, as an aside, found 5 pitfalls, which is usually acculturation or trying to use too much influence as based on your hierarchy, things of that nature, that lead to managers kind of struggling. And again, we could have stopped here. So this is pretty fantastic, right? We figured out managers matter. We figured out here's some key drivers. And we could have said, all right, we're going to laminate this, and everyone's badge will have this on the back of it, and we're done, right? Instead, we wanted to go further, right? So to be non-cynical, we went beyond, and we said, how can we integrate this throughout all of our processes at Google that involve managers? The most important place where we integrated this is our upward feedback survey. So it's a fancy word for our manager survey. It's conducted semi-annually, and what we did was there are 8 questions in that survey that tie directly back to these 8 characteristics that we found. So I, as a people manager, every 6 months, I'm rated by my employees on these 8 characteristics, which we know to be true influence my ability as a manager, which then incents me to start doing more of that, and hopefully I would get good scores in the upward feedback survey. So hugely important. It creates a nice incentive system, and it makes it pervasive throughout. In addition, basically anywhere a manager touches the People Ops organization, they learn about Oxygen. So the Great Manager Award, you can't win that unless you're exhibiting the 8 characteristics. Manager training, Oxygen references are sprinkled throughout all manager training. And then all communications, right? So when you get promoted to be a people manager, when you move into that space, you get an email that says, hey, did you know, or don't forget about Project Oxygen. Here are the key things that you should keep in mind and remember. So again, we could have stopped, we could have said laminated card, we're done, or we could have just had a white paper, shared it with Laszlo and been done. But we tried to get to every single Googler. So the thousands of managers that we have should all be able to really understand what Project Oxygen means and the benefits of the characteristics.